Hello, and welcome to the Creators Guild podcast. I am Chris Howell, and with me,
Jared Lovelady.
and we are here to talk about all things creative. As usual, we're going to start off with talking about our world, and we're going to read some more from A Flight from Shadows, Volume 1 of Ascension of a Queen of the Realms of Duradim, or the Chronicles of Duradim series. So, if you remember, last time we left off with our heroine and her friends running away. So now we're going to see what happens next. Chapter 10, A Safe Return, Cycle of Aerolith, year 12182. Can rescue by an enemy be called a rescue? Pre-Cataclysm Parchment Fragment, author unknown. Princess Tawara, said the leader of the party as he reined in and casually scanned the area. Finally, we have been looking for you for the better part of 2 days now. I am glad to see you are alive and well. We were starting to fear the worst. He was tall, even for a high elf, with a pale cream complexion and a short beard that matched his long, straight hair, the color of wheat. He wore a burnished steel breastplate emblazoned with a black dragon, its wings spread across the chest, talons gripping the blue and red shield of the Omari crest. A long white plume marked him apart from the others. Tawara released a breath she did not realize she had been holding. Her hands shook, and she could feel a tear roll down her cheek. She smiled and quickly wiped it away. She had not realized just how afraid she had been, both for herself and for her companions. Captain Ethrin, it is good to see you as well. We feared we would be stuck in this valley for days before we found our way out. In truth, we feared we may never make our way out at all. She paused a moment to gather her thoughts. I am grateful for your concern. I am certain you would have found your way eventually, Ethrin replied. You have had only the best training in Kuvia in scouting and tracking and the like. I am confident in my skills, Captain, but that is not what I was referring to. We were attacked this morning and have been riding hard to cover as much ground as possible since dawn. The captain's face took on a hard cast and his body tensed. He seemed to suddenly be watching all directions at once, even though his eyes never left Tawara's face. What do you mean you were attacked? He spoke quickly, all casualness gone from his voice. He gestured as he spoke, and the guardsmen moved to make a ring around the small group, suddenly alert. Attacked? I can think of no other way to describe it. It was early, before full dawn. 2 men snuck into our encampment. She paused momentarily before recounting the events that had taken place that morning and what had become of their assailants. Captain Ethrin listened intently. He asked no questions, but Tawara was sure that he had memorized every detail of her single telling. When she was finished, he turned to the youths. Is that how each of you remember the events of this morning? He demanded. Traylon gave a quick nod in the affirmative, fear plain in her expression. Well, I don't remember nothing that happened before I woke up, Traylon said. I just know I heard someone shouting real loud. It was still pretty dark, and it took me a bit to wake up. Then I looked and seen someone on top of Tawara, the princess. I didn't think about nothing. I just pulled out my knife and went for him. I didn't know what else to do. He was hurting her, see? She was lying there, and him on top of her. I had to do something, didn't I? Her eyes looked distant, as though she were speaking to no one in particular. Her face had gone pale, and she looked as though she might be sick again. Captain Ethrin ran his fingers over his short beard as he listened. When Traylon finished, he sat silently, considering her recitation. Finally, he nodded and turned his attention to the others. And the rest of you, do you have anything to add? Speak up now if you do. Anything, even a small thing, could be important. Well, me and Meg was sleeping when all the commotion went down, I guess, said Fram. First thing I remember was Traylon yelling to get up. Once I was up and the fuzz was out of my eyes, I seen them 2 men on the grass and Tawara running back to the water without a stitch on. I was wide awake then, for sure. After that, we just got the horses ready and lit out as quick as we could. Megrith started to speak and then hesitated. What is it, girl? Captain Ethrin asked, his voice calm, but full of authority. I need every detail, no matter how small. Well, she hesitated again, looking around the group, before dropping her eyes to the dirt. They was trekking, she said in a near whisper. What do you mean? The captain asked. They was trekking. Had their colours showing and everything. I never seen them before, I don't think. But that one's face was pretty smashed, and I couldn't bring myself to look too close at the one with the knife Well, the one Traylon took care of. Megreth's explanation was halting, her voice shaking, her eyes never making contact with the captain's. Captain Ithran mulled over her words before turning to Jephram. And you, do you have anything to add? Jephram looked around as though the captain might be speaking to someone behind him. Me? He asked meekly. Yes, you. Do you remember anything differently than the others? Well, Jephram said ponderously, I pretty much remember the same thing, only I threw up once, and Meg pissed her britches. Jephram grunted as Traylon's fist struck him hard in the ribs. He didn't mean stuff like that, she said fiercely. Megreth's face had gone crimson, and Fram was staring daggers at Jephram. Captain Ithran walked his horse forward a few steps and drew up beside Megreth, who continued to stare at the dirt. You are Meg? He asked gently. Megreth only nodded in reply. Meg, the first real battle I was in, I shat my armor before the fighting even began. After the battle, I vomited on myself as well. Any man who says he did not have a similar experience is a liar. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Megreth looked up at him then, relief painting her face. Oh, gods, Fram blurted out. You had to spend the whole battle with your armor full of that? He gave a shiver at the thought. Fram, Traylon interrupted. Captain Ithran smiled, still looking at Megreth. The entire battle, and hours after. It was not an enjoyable experience. He backed his mount away from Megreth and turned to Tawara again. You look a bit worse for wear yourselves. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, we are all well, Tawara replied. We suffered a few bumps and a cold, wet night, but have all come out whole and good. What about your side, Tawara? My lady, asked Traylon. I know that one was trying to stick his knife in you, and you was bleeding. It is nothing, Tawara said, waving her hand. He barely broke the skin. Captain Ithran grunted in frustration. I said every detail, Princess, and you failed to mention you were injured. Truly, Captain, it is nothing, a prick, nothing more, she assured him. Princess, with all respect, I will judge the severity of your injury. Do you know if the blade was poisoned? Have you checked the wound since you left this morning? Tawara paused, considering. The wound ached, but had not caused her any problems beyond discomfort. However, she had not had a chance to stop and look at it. Very well, Captain, she replied. I do not think it is a serious injury, but you are correct. It would be prudent to make sure. Very good, my lady, he replied. I hope that it is no more than a scratch. If you will give me a moment. The captain turned to the others in the group. Your horses are tired. Take their saddles off and rub them down while I inspect the princess's injury. He pointed to the two truckin who were with his men. You two, take the princess's horse, help the others with their mounts, and get them some water. I want to be on the move in a quarter of an hour. He called 4 of his men from the protective ring, giving them strict instructions. Tamar, Sorolla, ride back the direction the princess came. Make sure there is no threat behind us and discover what you can about these assassins. Report back no later than tomorrow by sundown, with anything you find. Ganiel, Thorum, ride back to Tradoc. Tell Corvin the princess has been found and is safe in my care. Tell him to expect us by late afternoon. The 4 saluted before 2 turned to ride toward the open meadow Tawara had crossed. The other 2 put heels to their mounts, disappearing quickly into the trees. Now, said the captain, if you will kindly step over here in the light, where I can see clearly, we can pretend to have a bit of privacy. I will make sure you are not going to die. He pulled open one of the saddlebags and retrieved a small pouch before walking to a short ridge of rock several paces away from the group. Tawara walked over to stand in front of the captain, unbuttoning her jacket and raising the side of her blouse so he could clearly see where the knife had been placed. Dried blood plastered the sash to her side. The captain poured water over it and carefully peeled it away. Tawara flinched at a stab of pain, and the throbbing started anew. If I did not like you, Captain, I would consider reporting you, she told him sarcastically, before flinching again at another poke from Ethrin's inspecting fingers. Ethrin let out a chuckle. Report me indeed. His voice took on an instructional tone. My lady, this is a small cut, but it is deeper than I would have thought. I see no signs of typical poisons, slow-acting or otherwise, but it is a puncture wound. I will need to clean it properly and apply herbs. To be sure, no form of infection will set in. It will not be pleasant. Do what you must, Captain, but please be quick about it. This is unpleasant enough already. She made an attempt to distract herself as Ethrin carried out his work by changing the subject. You did not seem at all worried about my disappearance, Captain. Indeed, Princess, Ethrin replied. This isn't exactly the first time you have gone off riding and not come back in a timely manner. Timely manner, Tawara blurted, scoffing at his tone. I have been missing for 2 days, Captain. I would consider that a significant understatement. My lady, he said, a grin crossing his face, I can recall searching for you for 2 days only to find you hidden away in the basement of a manor house with nothing but an oil lamp and a satchel of food you had squirreled away for yourself. I was a child, she began, but he continued as though she hadn't spoken. And then there was the time your father was called back from the capital after a 3-day search had not yielded your whereabouts. I believe you were finally discovered in a warehouse in Tradoc proper, taking care of a family of feral cats. He looked at her with raised eyebrows. Am I misremembering, my lady? Tuara let out an exasperated breath. I was a child, she declared. You can hardly hold those incidents against me. The captain sat back, squinting, as though trying to see something in the distance. I believe it was just over a year ago when you took Devant and decided to build a camp in the far end of the estate without telling anyone of your plans to do so. He brought his attention back to her, a bemused look on his face. Were you a child then, my lady? Tuara wanted to punch him in the gut. He hadn't even been there when she had decided to spend a few nights in the woods, and she hadn't even left the estate, so it didn't count. Of course, expressing the sentiment would only make her sound like a petulant child. She chose to concede instead. I concede that I have taken some liberties, but they have been rare occurrences, not habitual. You missing for a few days is not an unprecedented occasion, he said flatly. Fortunately for all involved, no harm has ever come to you. Well, not until now. When you didn't return the first day, our initial thoughts had been that you had decided to take one of your longer writing sessions. He gave her a flat look to emphasize his words. The next morning when Devant was discovered still saddled in the stables, and you were nowhere to be found, we were concerned that perhaps Devant had thrown you, and you were unable to return due to an injury. Devant returned to the stables, Tuara replied, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. I'm very glad of that. I was worried sick she might have gotten lost or injured in the storm. Almost as an afterthought, she added, Was father concerned as well? You did send word to him, I presume. Yes, we sent a rider to catch up to him on his way to Glen Heights. He instructed Corvin to use the full resources of the province to find you. He is making preparations to return tomorrow if he has not received word of your discovery by this evening. He paused for a moment, giving her a knowing, sympathetic look. I dare say it might be better for you that he is not there when we return. She felt her face flush with embarrassment and changed the subject again. How did you know to look for us here? I didn't even know this valley existed. We were sent out as soon as Devant was discovered. We started with the Trekkin camp. They told us you had left with the others to go riding, and were just as worried when none of you returned. After the storms, there was no chance of following your trail. We searched the surrounding countryside with no trace of you for the first day, so we made a guess you took to look here in the valley. It was more luck than anything. He collected his supplies, rising from the rock, and said, That is as good as I can manage with what I have at hand. Captain, Tuara said, placing a hand on his forearm, glancing around to make sure she would not be overheard. There is more you need to know, something my friends do not know about. Ethrin paused at the tone in her voice, his gaze intent, as he waited patiently for her to continue. Magrath was correct about the attackers. They were indeed Trekkin, at least they had been dressed as such. But more than that, she took a steadying breath, they knew me. I saw them in the Trekkin camp before we left. They had been watching our group and left before we did. I just assumed they were curious about my visit. I didn't recognize them until just before we left the clearing after the sun had risen. The one who did this to me, she indicated her side. When he had me held down in the grass, with his knife at my side, he told me they were meant to do things differently. He said I had messed up their plans and was going to finish me off right there instead. She trailed off, feeling a sense of panic as she momentarily relived the suffocation of being held down and the sharp pain from the slim blade as it reached toward her heart. He said I would never be accolade if I was dead, she added in a whisper. She had blocked out the trauma of the experience as they fled. Now, surrounded by guards, and in the safety of Ethrin's care, the weight of it settled on her. She felt herself tremble, and the question repeated itself in her mind. Why? She knew becoming an acolyte would be dangerous, but why try to kill her before she had even begun? My lady, he said in a near whisper, say nothing of the threat as far as the youths and the Trekkin with us are concerned. You were attacked by rogues. She realized she was holding her breath and was clenching her belt knife in a white-knuckled grip. She let out a sigh and dropped her hand to her side. You need not fear any leak of information from me, Captain. Discretion in what one does and does not say is something learned very early when one is destined to be a representative of the realm. Ethrin gave her a satisfied nod. I am glad we are of a mind on this, he said as he took a long strip bandage from his pack. I know you consider these young ones to be friends, but where your safety is concerned, we must be extra cautious. He wrapped the bandage around Tawara's ribs, covering the puncture wound at her side. She grunted as he snugged it tight. Now let us be on our way. The sun has already passed its zenith, and we have several hours of riding yet ahead of us. Very good, Captain. I will gather up the youths, and we can proceed home, Tawara said as she pulled her blouse back down over her bandage and tucked it into her breeches. I assume you find me fit enough to ride? Captain Ethrin nodded with a smile. Fit enough, yes. With his endorsement, she walked to the group and climbed into Cloud's saddle. I think it is past time we were on the move. Would you not agree? She asked them. I sure am ready to get a move on, Fram replied. One bout with brigands is surely good enough for me. The others nodded and offered sounds of agreement. You don't think we'll come across more of them, do you, Tawara, my lady? Megrith asked. No, Tawara replied. Besides, if we do, we have Captain Ethrin and his men to protect us. I believe we will be safe on our journey from here on. Tawara sat up tall in the saddle, and she straightened her back and said, I believe we are all ready, Captain. Captain Ethrin gave Tawara a deep nod. He snapped his reins against the neck of his tan gelding, and the animal stepped forward into a slow walk. Tawara kept her thoughts to herself as they rode silently, considering the events of the morning. She felt a sense of tired relief at finding herself in the protective company of the guard. The group seemed to share the same mood. Weary faces looked out at the scrub as they silently followed the trail beneath the thickening canopy. Finally, Jeffrem piped up. That sure is fancy tack you all have. Must have cost a pretty penny, I'd wager, he said to the guardsman, riding closest to him. Traylon, who still had a look of uncomfortable distrust in these elven guards, flicked Jeffrem in the ear. Hush, she whispered to him. We don't know what they want of us, and if we go yapping our mouths, it might just make them think we was nervous about something to stay quiet. You's worrying over nothing, Jeffrem whispered back. Tawara already told him we was trustworthy. She's the princess. If she says, it goes. Well, if you say so, it still seems to me we ought not trust them too much. Tawara glanced at Captain Ethrin. Their elven ears had heard the exchange, and the captain grinned at Tawara. While the two exchanged whispers, the guard answered Jeffrem, not having looked over to see that Jeffrem was otherwise engaged in a side conversation. He was now awaiting Jeffrem's reply. Boy! Jeffrem whipped his head back to face the guardsman. Oh, hey, what was that? Sorry, my girl had something to say. Jeffrem's cheeks warmed with a slight blush, and Traylon smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. I said, it is supplied by the Baron's household for all the guard, he repeated. You have nice equipment there as well, some of the finest I have seen among the Trekkin. Jeffrem looked down at the saddle. It was nothing special, a simple brown leather saddle. It had a small horn for holding a rope and a high back cantle with a little scrollwork on the leather. It was nothing out of the ordinary. He looked up from the saddle back at the guard with an inquisitive look. The guard grinned and nodded at Traylon. Mighty fine equipment indeed, the guardsman said with a chuckle in his voice. Should last a young man such as yourself a long time, if you take care of it properly. Oh, yes, only the best treatment for it, I assure you, Jeffrem replied. Traylon, the obvious subject of their conversation, feigned not to notice what the two were speaking about, but blushed slightly despite herself. Fram, on the other hand, chose to interject. He'll take right fine care of it, that's for sure. Marry her up and have babies and all of it. Of course there's going to be babies, Meg replied, rolling her eyes at her brother. When they do, you won't be the dumbest one in the band no more, for a little while anyways. Soft laughter passed through the group at the exchange. Tawara found herself smiling at the banter. She would have to make a point of visiting again on better terms, of course. She would miss her little band once they separated, and the youths returned to their camp. They rode in a loose double column, guardsmen on the left, the youths on the right. After the silence had been broken, conversation slowly began to break out throughout the group. Speaking of getting married, Fram said, to no one in particular, ignoring the last jibe from his sister, I couldn't convince Tawara to give up being a princess to marry me, but I'm pretty stubborn, so maybe I can still talk her into it. You such a dolt, Megrith retorted. She's got to marry a lord or a baron or somebody high up, not some beanhead like you. You don't know who she has to marry. She's a princess. If she wants to marry me, she can, and ain't no one gonna stop her. Fram, you're just an idiot. You don't know how it works. Tell him to... She trailed off for a moment before speaking more tentatively. What is we supposed to call you now? We've been riding together for 2 days, but I don't want to get in trouble with them. She waved her hand, indicating the soldiers. Tawara chuckled, turning back to address the young woman. You may call me Tawara. We are friends after all. And I will not officially be a princess until after my coronation. The concern on Megrith's face seemed to dissolve, and she smiled at Tawara. And what about you getting married? She pointed at Fram, as though she wanted to slap him in the back of the head again. This beanhead will just keep on if you don't set him to rights. As to that, I will never marry Meg. My duty is to my house, and when I am old enough, to the high court. You see, as a princess of the realm, I am in line to become queen someday. Well, I am actually third in line, but should the need come for me to be queen, I must be ready to fill the need. Megrith and Fram looked at each other, somewhat confused. They looked to Jeffrem and Traylon, but that seemed to be of no help. The two were far too busy in their own conversation to notice what was being said by the twins and Tawara. You said something about that when we was leaving the cave, Fram asked finally. What's that got to do with you getting married? Well, Tawara replied, considering how to explain it simply. Kuvi is a monarchy, currently ruled by Queen Marinda. If something should happen to her, she becomes too old and steps down or dies or some other such thing, the new queen will come from the crowned princesses of the realm. After my coronation, I will be one of the few crowned princesses. But what's that got to do with not getting married? Fram interjected. Hush, Fram, Megrith said. Give her a chance to finish. You don't know nothing about high elf law, so be quiet and listen instead of yapping. Fram gave her a sidelong glance, but took her advice and closed his mouth. Tawara smiled at the exchange. Right now, I am only a princess-elect. My house's bloodline and rank meant that if my parents had a daughter, she could become a princess. When I was a child, my mother and father petitioned the queen for me to be a princess-elect of the realm. She approved and sent the petition to the people of Avalonia. They had a vote, and I was approved by the people. When this happened, I became a princess-elect. When I come of age, if I haven't disqualified myself in any way, then I will have my coronation and become a crowned princess. At that point, I will be in line for succession to the throne. But what about getting married? Fram said in exasperation, earning a punch from Megrith. Yes, Tawara said with a giggle. If a princess-elect gets married, she cannot become a crowned princess. If a crowned princess gets married, she remains a princess and helps in governance, but cannot become queen. It is set up that way so there can never be a war for succession. If a queen wants to get married, she must step down. If she has consorts and has a daughter, that daughter can never become queen. So you see, if I wish to remain in line for the throne, I can never marry. But you can have a consort, right? Fram asked with a grin, earning another punch from Megrith. Tawara let out a guffaw, clapping her hand over her mouth. Captain Ithrin's laugh was nearly as loud, though he continued to ride straight-backed, watching the trail ahead. The sun rose high in the early afternoon sky. Almost no undergrowth was present to obstruct their view of the trail ahead as it turned north and became switchback, snaking its way up a steep incline to the top of the canyon. It was a breathtaking sight. The deep red canyon walls stretched below them and contrasted with the yellows, browns, and greens of the valley below. It is much more beautiful from this end, Tawara said. From this end? Captain Ithrin asked tentatively, confusion plain on his face. You mean you haven't been to this end of the valley? Oh. Tawara hesitated a bit at his expression. We came from the west end, at the tip of the crescent. But why? How, Your Highness? He asked. Did you find one of the mule trails that climb the face? Those truly are only used by bandits. We went down the scree at the mouth of the crescent, Tawara replied. One of the guardsmen, drinking from a water skin, choked at her response, spraying water over his tunic and his horse's head. Do you jest? Asked Captain Ithrin, glancing around at the youths for confirmation. It was stupid Jeffrem's idea, Megrith said flatly. The rest of the youths cast their eyes down, faces going red. Not to sound disrespectful, Princess, but have you lost your mind? Chuckles passed through the group of guards, and Tawara felt her face flush. We did not know there was another way into the valley. My young friends were overzealous and convinced me we would be safe. We did learn our lesson, however, and decided not to try riding out in the same manner we had ridden in. Well, you were lucky no one fell on the scree or was injured. It is very dangerous. Tuara felt her face flush more deeply, and she glanced away. She could feel Captain Etherin's eyes on her. I see, he said calmly. Princess, how did you end up losing Devant? We made a foolhardy choice and have suffered the consequences, she said indignantly, still not looking at him. Now, if we may, I would very much like for us to be on our way, Captain. As you say, my lady, we will speak of it no more. The mirth in his voice grated on her. We have reached the opening of the valley, he continued, halting the group. We can part ways with your Trekkin friends from here. They will be allowed to return to their encampment, with the escort of their elders, of course, and we will head in the direction of the manor house. We have several more hours to ride, and a message must be sent to inform your father that you have returned. I am sure he is anxious to know that you are well and safe. Yes, I am sure it is utmost on his mind, she replied. At any rate, it will be good to get a proper bath and into some fresh, clean clothes. A well-cooked meal would not be unappreciated either. I am sure everything will be waiting and of the utmost quality when we arrive, he told her as he looked around and down the trail. Do you hear that? He asked Tuara. She listened for a moment. Faintly in the distance, in the direction they were heading, she could hear a horn being blown. Yes, I think I do. Another search party, perhaps? Captain Etherin turned and called to one of his men further back in the column. Private, give the call. The young man in the back of the group quickly took a case from his saddlebag and rode forward to the captain's side. From the case he took a short brass bugle. He held it up to his lips and gave a long, clear blast. Everyone waited in silence for a long moment. A double call came back from the source of the mystery party ahead of them. Captain Etherin grimaced and spat on the ground. It would be them. Form up, men, double file. Put the youths behind you. You two, Trekkin, you take up the rear. Is there a problem, Captain? Tuara asked. She waited silently, hoping her suspicions were incorrect. It's his men, Etherin said, not elaborating further. Tuara sank in her saddle. She knew exactly who the captain meant by his men. Although officially, all of the men serving Umari in the Avalonian Guard were under the command of Captain Etherin. The House Guard, led by personally selected lieutenants, was under the direct control of Premier Corvin. They were known for strict adherence to rules and protocols, as well as their cruelty in enforcing them. I have to deal with the man directly, my dear Captain. I can handle myself around his men, Tuara reassured him. Be that as it may, it is not your hide nor mine I am concerned about, Etherin told her. It is your friends here that may be in some measure of danger, I am afraid. The young ones? She asked, looking back at the Trekkin youths. Why ever would they be in danger? They have done nothing wrong. Fear welled up in her. She could feel it, turning her stomach into knots. If Corvin could cause her pain, he would, by any means, even if it meant the harm of innocence. They were with you, and you were kept from returning for 2 days, Etherin said flatly. That could be seen by some as kidnapping. His mood seemingly grew dark as another double blast from the other group's trumpet sounded. There is no sense in dallying here, Etherin said, as he urged his bay forward. You, Trekkin, ride tight and keep your mouth shut. This lot does not see your kind as welcome travelers or merchants in our lands, as most of the Kuvian elves see you. Just do as you're told, and don't make any trouble, and I will do my best to see that nothing comes of this unwanted rendezvous. Tuara put heel to cloud and kept beside Captain Etherin. She looked back to see fear on the faces of the youths. Margaret looked as if she might cry. Traylon held tight to Jeffrem, who was doing his best to bravely sit tall in the saddle. His eyes, however, gave away his inner fear. Fram's face was ghostly. His head hung low, as if he were already headed to the gallows. As Etherin's group came closer to the house guard, Tuara could see the sigil on the breastplate of the lead rider. It was Bernard, one of Corvin's favorite lackeys. The black dragon had long been the symbol of House Umari. However, in the years since Premier Corvin had taken his place in the house, the once grand, spread-winged beast had been changed to a sinuous serpent without wings. More important than the house sigil was the small star on Bernard's right breast. It marked him as a lieutenant. It was a high enough rank for him to cause Captain Etherin a headache, should any conflict in what was to be done with these Trekkin arise. If only they had come across the house guard another few minutes later, the Trekkin would have been well on their way. "Halt!" came a shout from the young lieutenant. "State your business in halting the captain of the guard and princess-elect of the realm," Etherin replied with more than a little heat in his voice. "Ah, Captain Etherin," the lieutenant said in a less than respectful tone. "We wondered what had come of you and your lot when you did not return with the princess last night. The premier feared that you, too, may have become lost in the wilderness while on your search. I see the princess has been found, and no worse for wear, it would appear. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Bernard, but I am afraid you will find find us all quite in possession of our wits and bearing. I fear you will have to fulfill the station you hold a bit longer." He paused for a moment, scrutinizing the lieutenant. "No salute for your captain today, Bernard?" he asked, with an edge of ice in his voice. Lieutenant Bernard's face grew grim as he brought his fist to his chest. Before the captain could return his salute, Bernard turned to the group of guards riding behind him. "Jareth, Lorana, ride with all haste back to Tradoc. Tell the premier that the princess is safe." Two riders gave a nod of acknowledgement and broke from the group, spurring their horses into a quick gallop in the direction of the city. Bernard turned back to Ethryn, his tone formal. "I was given orders to pass on to you if we came in contact with one another. You are to return the princess to the manor house with haste. Lady Farandane is dead. Word was received last night that she fell to assassins. The culprits have yet to be identified. You are to return to your post and take up coordinating our forces in the province, as you should have been already, instead of personally gallivanting across the countryside in search of the princess-elect." Tora bristled at Bernard's last words before her breath caught as the full scope of what Bernard had said sunk in. Lady Farandane dead? "But how did they—" Tora began. Her mind was racing, thoughts returning to the clearing and her attackers. What happened to her? Was she attacked by bandits? Were her killers caught? The questions poured from her in a rush. The words of the man who held the knife at her side rang in her mind. "We was meant to do this different like. I figure to finish the job off right here and now. You can't be no accolade if you're dead." Twara had met Lady Farandane when she had come to Tradoc with Baron Farandane. She had liked the younger princess-elect. She, too, had ambitions to become accolade, and the two had bantered about the way they would compete against one another. "Princess Twara, please," Ethryn said in a soft voice. "Those questions will all need answers, but none of them will help us here. You are safe with us. We will return you safe to your home." At that, he turned to the lieutenant, his voice becoming that of the captain of the guard. "Bernard, did the premier have any other instructions for me? What threat are we under at this moment?" "The threat is high, but not imminent as of now, although that could change. The provinces are organizing their relative guards, but this may be a political move, not a military one. For now, you are to deliver the princess to the premier as soon as you can. We will take care of these humans." He sneered as he spoke, disdain dripping from every word. "We came across their band this morning, and came to the same conclusion you must have, that these Trekken were involved in the princess's disappearance, if not more grave actions. The premier will have great interest in speaking with them." Twara's eyes grew wide. She looked to Captain Ethryn pleadingly. She knew if the youths were taken into custody by the house guard, they would suffer the inquisitors, at least, and most likely the strap, for nothing more than being with her when she had chosen to break the rules. "You need not trouble yourselves with these young ones," Ethryn told Bernard. "They are with their elders now, and will be returning to their caravan to face their parents and the band council for their actions." "I have my orders, Captain, and they are very clear," Bernard spat. His voice matched the viperous dragon on his breastplate. "Now you have yours, also very clear. I recommend you follow them with haste, or the premier may become impatient with you." "You cannot let him take them," Tora whispered to Ethryn. They will harm and abuse them, and you know it. It is not right." Ethryn nodded to her and again addressed Bernard. "Lieutenant," Ethryn said, his voice a sharp whip crack in the air, "you have delivered your message. Now take your men and return to Tradoc. I will escort the princess to the manor house and explain to the premier my decision to let the youths go, not sit here in the road and explain it to you." "As much as I would rather not have to deal with such beings, I have my duty to uphold, Captain," Bernard retorted. "The youths will return with me to Tradoc. I am officially charging them with reckless endangerment of the princess. The premier will want them to return for questioning." A sickening smile crossed his lips as he finished. "If they have done nothing wrong, then they have nothing to fear." Captain Ethryn was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the softness of his voice was menacing. "Very well, Lieutenant. If you choose to make formal charges on these humans, that is within your rights as an officer of the province. I am sure the premier will arrive at the same conclusion I have after speaking with them." Mark that not one measure of harm comes to them, Bernard," Twara interjected, her cheeks flushing with her anger as she spoke. "Or you will find that armor you hide behind small protection from the noose in which you find your neck." "My lady, let me take care of this, please," Ethryn said to her, doing his best to take on a soothing tone. "Since we are all going in the same direction, you will ride together under my command. You and your men may fall into the rear, Lieutenant. Indignation flashed across Bernard's face before he stilled his emotions. As you command, Captain, he said coldly, once again bringing fist to chest before leading his men to the rear of the procession. Okay, that was chapter 10.
So longer than I remembered.
I know. I was like, wow. That's in the middle. I checked the page and I'm like, again, I enjoy reading my own writing. But on a podcast, I was like, this is a long chapter. Well, we hope you enjoyed it. I like I said, I enjoy reading and enjoy going back and being like, oh yeah, I remember that. That's fun to write about or read about. So, well, we have another guest on with us today. Art, you want to come up and join me over here at the mics?
Okay, there we go.
Check your makeup.
There sure. You go. Kind of there in a way. As you
you probably want to put that where it's in a good spot for you.
That in a good spot? Does that work?
Yeah, that works.
Should be good.
Okay.
So, Art Reach is with us today.
Welcome, Art.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
So Art is in our Writers Guild group with us. Jared and I are in the speculative fiction group, and we focus on high fantasy. There's another fantasy group, and it is the dark fantasy and horror genre group.
Yes, correct.
And Art is the leader of the dark fantasy and horror genre.
Yes.
So we were all in the speculative fiction group together, and then Art decided to go the dark fantasy route and rebel and create his own faction within the fantasy organization.
And you could say that, yeah, kind of make me to be out a little bit of an anarchist, which I'm really not, but I just kind of thought there was the need there for that. Mainly because there are a lot of things that can be expressed in the dark aspect of fantasy / horror that aren't really conveyed with that depth of intensity or emotion in high fantasy, your traditional lines of fantasy, Tolkien-esque type works.
Yeah. So we've actually had some conversations with Art, kind of talked about like the differences between fantasy in general and dark fantasy. So diving, and Art wanted to come on today to kind of talk about that. We wanted to have a kind of a conversation about what is the difference between dark fantasy and traditional fantasy, and then also talk about horror and get into that genre discussion a little bit there. So from your let's just dive right in. From your perspective, Art, how does dark fantasy differentiate itself from traditional fantasy or even high fantasy?
Dark fantasy focuses more upon the dark aspects of life. No one is going to go through life and come out unscathed.
Yeah.
When you have the Tolkien-esque works or Dunsanian type fiction, which is what Lovecraft also wrote, but he wrote that in a very dark vein as well, you don't actually get to convey the depth of pain that you can, but it's kind of drawn out a little bit longer.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more concise and sharp when you're dealing with in the venue of dark fantasy and horror.
Yeah.
Because you are having the elements thrust, boom, right at you.
Yeah. So when you think of, so let's talk dark fantasy to begin with. From a dark fantasy perspective, who is an author and what are some works that you would point to and say, this is dark this is like my go-to for dark fantasy?
Dark fantasy, I have a number of them. My number one mentor who actually taught me since the time I was, as we say back home in Texas, knee-high to a grasshopper, was my literary mentor, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. And there have been others, August Derleth, Robert Bloch, who have delved into dark fantasy. Some of the works that were created, Lovecraft, At the Mountains of Madness, and some of his shorter shorts. When I first started reading Lovecraft, I started working and writing in short shorts because that was my introduction to H.P. Lovecraft.
Gotcha.
So I got a chance to study style, content, how to write an intense story with only 500 to 600 words.
Gotcha. So
And
when you say
keep it.
short shorts, you're
A
meaning
short, yes.
really short stories, not 1980s men shorts.
No.
You're not
right.
Magnum PI. That's
No,
not what you're
no.
talking about. Okay.
Correct. Got it.
Okay.
That's
Just making sure. Okay. So is there any, from a story perspective, is there any particular book, short story that you would say, if you were going to get thrown to an island and you could pick 2 or 3 books or stories in the dark fantasy genre, what would you take with you to read there?
What the Moon Brings is what's called the dreamland aspect of Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft has 2 bodies of fiction, the Cthulhu mythos and his Dunsanian works, which take place like in a dream type cycle.
Yeah.
So, At the Mountains of Madness probably would be one of them, mainly because of its structure, the intensity for which it draws the readers into it. And then I'll pick maybe The White Ship, maybe to brag a little bit about what I've done. I wrote a story, the sequel to The White Ship, called The Return of the White Ship, The Quest for Cathuria. So that is one story which I read when I was very, very young.
Yeah.
And it's one story that just kind of carried with me. And I wrote the sequel to that I started it in 1985. And then I finished it about 1989. I was actually terrified to take an established work by H.P. Lovecraft and put it out there and say, okay, I'm going to do something that has not been done. I'm going to write a sequel to a story by my mentor.
Yeah.
And it got published.
Okay.
And it carried over, I thought, very well.
Yeah. That sequel, is it available right now?
I believe so. It is in a book called Cthulhu's Heirs,
Okay.
which is put out by Chaosium.
Chaosium.
Yes, correct.
Is that
That's
a
publisher.
but is it a publisher that kind of focuses in that
Yes,
genre
dark
of
fantasy,
publishing?
yes.
Okay. Okay. So what about from the horror genre? Who are your go-tos for horror?
Since I really don't work too much in the horror genre, I'd probably say Stephen King because of the range and scope of what he writes and how he writes it and how it's presented. He's very diversified
Yeah.
in his presentation of his material. So I kind of like what he does. So he would definitely be my main go-to.
Okay. With Stephen King, so just a little tidbit that I didn't even realize until recently. There's a gentleman that I work with that he and I sometimes will get into the discussion of books and different authors and what we've read and whatnot. I gotta take a drink real quick, man. Anyway, we'll get into these discussions, and we started talking about Stephen King, and I've read a lot of Stephen King's works. One of the criticisms I've had of Stephen King in the past is his endings, where I'm like, whatever the story is, even like reading The Stand, you go through The Stand with all of these intricacies and everything, and then you get like right up to the end and you're like, supernatural stuff. It's kind of like, it has the feel to me, or it has in the past, it has had the feel to me of because magic, only it's like because aliens or because supernaturally things. And so to me, even though I've enjoyed I love Stephen King's openings, especially. Like when he opens a story, even if it's this simple, he has a way of laying things out very simply in an opening scene and drawing in your interest, even though nothing's happening yet. And but you get this sense of foreboding, even though like nothing has happened at all. And so it kind of draws you in a little bit. So I love his openings. I've always struggled with the ends of his stories. But I have to go back and do some rereading now because I didn't know. I know like a lot of his stories center around Derry, Maine. but I didn't know if you look at even like It and The Stand and like all of these stories, they all are part of the same world or the same universe, and they all connect. And it's not like I've read everything as, well, this is its own story, and now this over here, this is like It is just a standalone story about Pennywise, you know,
Right.
and the kids. And you get to the end of it, and you're like, wait, what? But now, when you connect that, like the Dark Tower series, my buddy at work was like, yeah, there's Pennywise is in the Dark Tower series, and characters from the Dark Tower are in The Stand, and characters from The Stand are seen in It. But it's not like Easter eggs. It is, this is all this world that's centered around, you know, like Derry, Maine is just this place where these things are manifested.
Right.
And then I'm like, oh, if I read it that way, totally different.
Exactly.
Totally different way in which to observe this world. I don't know if you, like, did you know that already?
A little bit. I just thought, wait a minute, didn't I just read this someplace in another one of his novels? So, yes, actually, I did. But now I'm glad you refreshed my memory on that.
Yeah. Yeah, so for me, like, I would say the same thing. Like, I haven't read a lot of horror. What I have read, I've read quite a bit of Stephen King.
Okay.
Would Bram Stoker's Dracula, would that be? What would that fall? Would that be? Because, I mean, it has some, it gets into some,
It is horror, definitely. Classic literature.
yeah.
It is taught at the collegiate level, as is Frankenstein, as is H.P. Lovecraft, as Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
They're all taught at the collegiate level.
But
Yes.
from a horror, dark fantasy, yeah, Dracula would fall into horror.
Yes.
What would Poe fall into?
A psychological horror more than anything else. But still that aspect of horror. It is the
Yeah.
darkness.
Yeah, I think I've read all of Edgar Allan Poe stuff. But I don't know. I've never seen, but I've read everything from Edgar Allan Poe that I'm aware of that he's written.
Okay.
But
Fair enough.
so going back to the differences here. So there were a couple things you wanted to try to talk about a little bit, like with dark fantasy and horror. You've expressed when we've talked a little bit that there are some misconceptions
Yes.
about dark fantasy and horror.
Yes.
So what are the misconceptions that you see?
Someone from HWA, Horror Writers Association, posted something on Facebook. It had a picture of Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, that little doll. I can't remember the name of that little doll that murders.
Chucky.
Chucky,
Chucky.
thank you.
I was
Thank
like,
you,
there's a
Jerry.
bunch
Yeah.
of little dolls.
Yeah, you're right. That's true.
There's all kinds of murder
Chucky,
dolls.
yes.
But yeah,
Thank
Chucky.
you very much. Chucky, right. And the caption said how the public perceives horror writers. And beside that picture, there was a little like cartoon characters of like bunnies and different things that said something completely different. That said, and this is who we really are. We are not mass murderers. We are not monsters that we create. We use our fingers, our paintbrushes, our pens, pencils, whatever, to dip into the darkness of the world.
Yeah.
And then we take that and we write what we see and what we feel and what we have experienced.
Yeah.
And we try to maybe, I think, bring healing through horror and bring about some restoration through the pain of anguish of what life involves. You're not to go through life and not get out unscathed.
Yeah.
We had on Sunday at church, the church I attend, our pastor discussed Psalm 69, the first 3 verses, which deal with David saying, I've had it. I'm in pain. My feet I'm sinking in. And we all go through those periods of life. And we're trying to focus on getting healing. At least I am.
Yeah.
For example, okay, I lost my dog
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, and I have not been able to shake that feeling. I'm still trying to write that story. It's
Yeah.
written in the context of the Cthulhu mythos of H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah.
So I want to take that story and use it, I hope, for others to be a balm that brings healing. Says, I lost my dog. I can identify with that.
Yeah.
I can identify, maybe not with the character, but I can identify with the heart, the feeling that goes into it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to convey to majority of people that there is a lot that the horror genre does offer to
Yeah.
people.
What for me I've not dipped into much horror or dark fantasy, but it's not something I'm not interested in.
Okay.
What would be a good starting place for me?
For me, I'll only speak from my experience. What I did, Jared, the stories that I first read were shorts by H.P. Lovecraft, and I supplemented them with works from Edgar Allan Poe, mainly because H.P. Lovecraft was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe touched his works very profoundly, and that merge of the darkness in the human characters Lovecraft created shows evidently in the works that he did. I would probably suggest maybe start reading some of the shorts like Memory, What the Moon Brings, The White Ship, things along those lines, and get acquainted with him, his shorter works first, and then delve into the longer works,
Okay.
like The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath at the Mountains of Madness, Shadow over Innsmouth, for instance.
Okay.
Just so you can get a feel.
So kind of going off Jared's question, for anybody that, you hear the word horror and you immediately think of, Jason
Slasher,
and Friday the 13th and, anything along those lines. I mean, there's a lot deeper, more gruesome, horror that's out there. But for anybody who hears horror or dark fantasy, what's the hook that you would throw out there to say, hey, try casting your line over into these waters?
Okay.
What's the pitch to get somebody to dabble in, to dip their toes into the different pond?
Take a look. I would probably say, first of all, take a look at what is out there. Kind of get a feel. Read different stories, read different authors who delve into horror, and kind of get a feel for what they're trying to convey. Not all of us are going to have that sense of healing, but a couple of us in HWA have gone the route of using, as a matter of fact, that's in our guidelines. We use horror for healing because, like I said, there's a lot of pain. So we're trying to get some literature out there as well that says there is an other side to the horror genre for those who have experienced pain. For instance, you look at the classic works of literature. Macbeth is driven by the actions of the witches.
Yeah.
And then Hamlet, which is a very dark story of despair, hopelessness, it is driven by the ghosts.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that, even in classic literature, that need to be focused and looked upon. If you don't like horror, well, that would rule out, obviously, Macbeth, even Hamlet, and that would even rule out A Christmas Carol by Dickens,
Yes.
since that is ghost-driven
Yeah.
as well.
Well, I was thinking of the Odyssey. I'm like, even that has like, it explores. He's gone for such a long time, and the experiences that he goes through, the experiences his men go through. People getting like ripped apart and feeling the emotional depth of, and the back in that time, they didn't know the phrase PTSD.
Right.
But I'm like, I'm pretty sure everybody.
Right.
I'm pretty sure there's a lot of PTSD going on right there.
Correct.
Or the movie The Gladiator. Is there a book for that? I don't know if there's a book or if it's based on a book or if it's just a movie.
I think it's just a movie, actually.
Unless I'm not sure.
Jared, do you know for sure?
I don't know for sure. I can look it up real quick.
Okay.
Yeah. But like that, even though you can watch The Gladiator as like this action adventure, somebody who's fallen and rises back up to conquer and everything. I'm like, but it explores the depths of pain and suffering of the human soul.
Right.
And the anguish of facing revenge and forgiveness and, and then just so many different things. And if that would fall, in my opinion, that would fall into that somewhere in the dark fantasy horror realm.
Emotionally.
Exactly. And, even from, like, what is portrayed on screen, like, think of The Truman Show.
Right.
This is what you and I had talked about a little bit before, of if you take the Truman Show and like when he and his wife are being intimate, and then it cuts to the guy and he's like, well, they always turn the camera and point out the window and they play some music or something, or even cozy murder mysteries. I'm like, they're exploring murder. They don't fall into the horror genre. No. You don't see the murder. You don't see the blood. You experience with the characters, you experience they're sad or they're frustrated or whatever. In my explanation of how I would describe a lot of horror or dark fantasy is the camera doesn't pan away.
Right. Because
in life, the camera doesn't pan away.
You nailed it.
So
exactly.
If you're the main character driving in the car and your significant other is driving in the car with you, and part of the horror story is the brutal death of the significant other that the main character goes through, it's not just a description of the loss afterwards. It is, so I was thinking of while we were talking a minute ago of the never-ending story. Wow. In the swamps of sadness.
Yes.
I'm like, that scene is, Artax, and he's trying. It is Artax, right?
I think so. Yes,
yeah,
I remember right.
He's pulling on his horse's reins. It's like you see the horse sink below the waters in the swamps of sadness, and it's like you are there with him through the entire experience, and then it shows Sebastian back and he's wiping the tears. Oh, it's so terrible. And it's like you just experienced that with Sebastian and with Atreyo. You just experienced all of it right there with them. The camera did not pan away and imply that Atreyo just lost his horse. You saw it happen.
Yeah.
And you're like, as a kid, I was like, oh my gosh, I cried with Sebastian too. I'm like, that scene is, in my opinion, that scene in the Never-Ending Story, which ends with da da da, flying on the dragon at the end and rebuilding all the things and making wishes,
Right.
I'm like, the ending definitely does not fit into the genre, but that scene, and it's not the entire. If you're reading a story that is horror or dark fantasy, the entire story isn't just you keep experiencing Atreyo losing his horse and crying with Sebastian. But when those things happen, you experience it like in real time.
Right.
So, like I said, it's the camera doesn't pan away.
Right. What dark fantasy does, it isn't the monster driven. It isn't driven by Cthulhu, Hastur, Shub-Niggurath, any of the other monsters relevant to the Cthulhu mythos. It is driven by the actual character. It is driven by them overcoming
Yeah.
these obstacles. And it just so happens to be that these beasties are these enormous monsters, creatures, what have you, and we have to fight and overcome the darkness, the fear that they represent. And that is the same thing that I try to do in my own literature. I focus a lot on fear. I suffer from depression, and there's a lot of things that I concern myself with and think, oh my God, I'm terrified of this. What's going to happen? So I try to focus on fear, and I'm hoping that in something I write, I want to convey that emotion. You know,
Yeah.
I'm going through this, and if that is a healing balm for someone, I'd like to convey that to them so I can help them work through their anxiety, their fear, frustration, whatever it is, and whatever method I use to convey that with. It isn't how relative my own monsters are within the mythos. It is a matter of how my characters rise above those obstacles to combat them and beat them and overcome them.
Yeah. Or, like in some cases, I mean, so that I would say, particular to you, I'm not taking away from your description, but in dark fantasy and horror in general, sometimes they don't overcome them.
That's true.
Sometimes it's not the overcoming, it's learning to just accept it.
Correct.
You know.
Absolutely. You're right. That is the other side of it, too.
It's
Because life doesn't always end with good, happy, colorful rainbows and a field of flowers and butterflies and bunnies. It doesn't end that way. Every
Yeah.
tragedy does not come out on the bright, sunny side.
Yeah. There is, to be a little bit anecdotal here about, there's an interview that I saw with a lady that, I don't remember, she was from like northern Mongolia
Right.
or somewhere in that
Okay.
region, and she had come to the United States. And like the best they could estimate, she was like 112 years old. And they're interviewing her. And in her heavily she'd been in the U.S., I don't know, maybe 40 years, 50 years, something like that. She came when she was, had already had children and raised, at least partially raised a family and whatnot. And somehow it ended up, I don't remember how she ended up in the U.S., but they're interviewing her. And they're like, well, we can't definitively say, yep, she's this old. And so they're asking her like, the classic questions of, how did you live this long?
Right.
And what's the secret? And her response, you could see the interviewer's face, like, what? Because her response was, like, along the lines of, I don't know why I'm still alive. This is ridiculous. I should have died a long time ago. Everybody I know is dead. And, like, I don't know why I continue to just hang on. My body should just die. It's time. I should have died. I shouldn't be here anymore. Like, this is... And I'm like, hey, that would be a character in a dark fantasy or a horror, something like that, of this person, where she grew up was not pleasant
Right.
to grow up. And she experienced a lot of different things. And then again, like she said, everybody that I love is dead. They're all gone. They all died before me. And it's just me. And so it's like, yeah, you're waiting for oh yeah, you should focus on living as long as you can. And to do that, eat strawberries every morning for breakfast. And, and make sure to drink your Ovaltine, whatever.
Yeah.
It was, this lady's faced some stuff. Like, she's had some major slaps in the face with reality. But one of the things that typically goes along with those stories is, even if you're broken, even if you're, it's kind of a symbology of, we're all a little bit broken.
True.
We're all a little bit thrown around, and it isn't a bed of roses. And even if it were a bed of roses, go try laying on a bed of roses and see how much you bleed.
That's true. Every rose has its thorn.
Yeah.
Very true. So even though there is darkness in the world, I think for me, I try and put some hope into the scenario and say, you know, there is still some hope through the pain, through the anguish. There is something else on the other side. So my thrust for dark fantasy is I want to bring some light into the darkness.
Yeah.
And using the horror, dark fantasy, actually, I should say, I predominantly work in dark fantasy. I use that to, I hope, bring some healing into the world, into
Yeah.
those who read the genres.
Yeah. Have you read any of Ray Bradbury?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, years ago, yes.
So, Ray Bradbury's stories, I mean, like, a lot of that is like, you're like, what was even the point of that? It's just so bleak. You know?
Fahrenheit 451, for instance.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking like some of his short stories.
Okay.
He wrote a lot of stories that took place on Mars.
Right.
You know, and it's this futuristic, and one of them I can't remember the name of it, but I can remember the story where there's this house, and everything in the house is all completely automated and everything, and all that happens is the house. It's like the food gets baked in the oven, but nobody eats the food. The food just sits there until it's time to clean up, and then all the food gets automated, taken away. The vacuum comes out and keeps cleaning the floor. You know, there's all these little things that happen, and you're like, there's no people here. Like, it just goes through day, you know, that it's been doing this forever. And then, like, something shorts out, and it starts a fire, and then like, cinders are falling and stuff, and the little vacuum senses, oh, it's dirty, and it's trying to clean up while it's burning, you know, and the oven is still making food until eventually everything gets consumed and the house is just a pile of ash. And it kind of pans out, and you get the feeling like everybody's gone. Everybody, like, there's this city or town or neighborhood or whatever that is potentially like Star Trek perspective of you can just talk to the what is it called, Jared? The replicator.
replicator.
You can talk to the replicator and be like, I want a BLT with rye bread, you know, whatever. And it'll make it. It's kind of along those lines. But whatever has happened, the humans aren't there anymore. Well, and even like one scene, a dog is there. There's still a dog there, but the dog can't get the food and everything, and then the dog dies. And then its carcass is there, and the little things come out and clean it. And it talks about the dog, like its body being taken apart and cleaned up because it's a mess, and it's got to be clean. So the little robots clean everything, and you're like, what? But it's interesting, read it like reading those things and then walking away with perspective from all the different angles you can examine.
Exactly.
Those stories.
And you phrased it very well, Chris. Thank you. That is the whole idea. Look at horror and dark fantasy. They're not the same genre.
Yeah.
Look at them both through a different set of eyes. Look at them through someone who has been through hell, who has been through pain. Like I said, you are not going to get out of this life unscathed.
Yeah.
Look at it from that perspective and take a look at what has been created and take a look at what the characters go through to overcome and triumph over that darkness.
Yeah.
Whether it's in dark fantasy or in horror. So we try, at least I'm one of the writers who tries to use that to bring healing into other people's lives.
Yeah. So one of the things, so I'll bring up I was talking to my sister a little bit about like asking for her opinion on what she thinks about dark fantasy and horror. Her perspective is like she loves diving deep, delving into stories and engaging, and she's got a very vivid imagination and, you know, can just consume written material. Mm-hmm. The struggle she has is even with things that aren't necessarily, that don't fall into the dark fantasy horror genre, but things that take a darker turn to them. What she said to me is, for her, getting into the depths of the trauma or things like that. Like she said, she dreams very vividly, and she dreams a lot about stuff that she reads, and she'll wake herself up experiencing all of the emotions that come from those stories. So for her, she's like, if I read something like that, I'm going to, like I already potentially have, if she's felt loss or experienced things like that, she'll already wake herself up experiencing depths of emotion, or wake up in the morning, like we talked about having dreams where doing lucid dreaming and being able to fly, like those are the really cool dreams. But now take that lucid dreaming aspect and the feeling of like, I feel like I can, when I wake up, I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that was real. I should be able to like jump off my bed right now and take off flying. It's so vivid and so real. But now take the dark fantasy, the deep emotions or the depth of exploration of the human condition, and then start dreaming about that at night. And so from her perspective, she's like, I'm afraid to dip my toes into the water even.
Well, from that perspective, I can definitely appreciate that. That's understandable. I realize that the horror, dark fantasy genres and everything they encompass aren't for everyone.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we do focus on things that are wrong, bad, that need or should be changed. And we do it allegorically.
Yeah. So one more time if there's somebody out there who's listening to this conversation and thinking, maybe I should give this a try. Where, kind of like with Jared, if you said, go out, find this story, and read it, what's the one?
A very, very short by H.P. Lovecraft called Memory. Memory. That story haunted me, and it still does, because of the implications that are brought up in it. Memory and What the Moon Brings are
Memory,
two stories.
What the Moon Brings.
What the Moon Brings. Definitely Memory. If I had to pick one out of all the repertoire of H.P. Lovecraft, it would be Memory.
Okay.
It's
so there
a
you go,
quick
Jared.
read, not even
Memory.
Yeah.
It'll take you not even 2 minutes to read. It's a very quick, short. And it's worth the time and effort because it will leave you haunted. At least it did me. And his work inspired me since I was, like I said, we say back home in Texas, knee-high to a grasshopper. And that was one story that I still carry with me in my heart and up here.
And tell us again the story that you wrote. That's the White Ship, the sequel to the White Ship.
Yes, that is called it is the sequel to the White Ship, called The Return of the White Ship: The Quest for Cathuria, which is put out. The title of the book that it's in is Cthulhu's Heirs, which is put out by Chaosium.
Cthulhu's
books.
Heirs.
Cthulhu's Heirs.
Is
yes.
that on? Can people find that on Amazon?
Amazon, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So go find that. You'll be able to read Art's sequel to The White Ship.
And the reason, I just want to say, yes, the reason I wrote that, the ending of that story, even in Lovecraft's higher dreamland material stuff that he wrote in the Dunsanian type mode, there was always a very dark feel aspect to what he wrote. And I did not like the way the story ended. It bothered me so much that I felt I have to write something positive out of this.
Yeah.
It was a little bit too dark and too bleak. So I repenned it, and I tried to at least put a little bit of hope into it. Now, another thing that I did too, it was multi-purpose. There are a lot of different people and things that have influenced me as a writer. For instance, I'm a diehard fanatic fan of an English band called the Moody Blues. Mm-hmm. And I gave them tribute. So this was also my tribute to the music of the Moody Blues. I even incorporated something of Shakespeare into it. And of course, taking a work from H.P. Lovecraft, that was my thank you. So this was my personal thank you to everyone, to a lot of people and organizations, groups that have influenced and touched my life.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to have to look that up and see if I can find it and read it. Because we've shared a little bit of, in some of our writing group,
Right.
little bits and pieces. But,
Right.
yeah, we'll have to go check that out and read it.
Definitely. Definitely check that out.
So, yeah, go check out, you don't have to dive directly into Stephen King. You don't have to be like, let's see, I'm going to open Cujo and start there.
Right.
There are a lot of different areas that you can explore and start in. But, one of the things from a creative perspective, one of the things we are trying to encourage is go explore different things that will encourage your own creativity.
Exactly.
And expand your own influence and perspective of the world around you.
And if exploring dark fantasy and horror helps, at least hopefully change your perspective, your view of how you look at us as human beings and as writers, I think that'll be beneficial also, because maybe it'll open up your mind a little bit more. And I'm not saying focus on the darkness and the pain in the world,
Yeah.
but it is there.
But it's
and
real.
It is real. Contend with it. Rise up over it.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I try to do with my own body of literature within the Cthulhu mythos.
And if you can do it while wearing Magnum PI short shorts, it'll make the life that much better, right? It'll make the experience
A little bit more interesting.
or that much more interesting.
There you go.
At the least. So, well, Art, we appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. It was a blast. Jared, thank you. I had a wonderful time. Thank you for allowing me to be on here. I loved your book, by the way. I loved the chapter you read. It is from that one chapter that I heard, it is, you use dialogue to propel the action, the plot along. So I can kind of follow along by the way you structured your dialogue. You did a great job. I loved it.
So
Thank you.
that's where Jared had to fix me on some of those things.
Oh, really?
Because I'm an engineer. So I get into, I'm going to describe everything. And
So you two are a perfect meld then.
Jared had to be like,
right, okay.
that's a great description, but this isn't a pamphlet
Right.
or an instruction manual. And I'm like, but it reads really well.
well.
Like, yeah, but it's got to be spread out. So,
The merge of the two different perspectives that you bring to the book, fantastic. I loved it.
Thanks.
I am impressed. And I
So,
wish you the best.
hopefully we keep going that way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Appreciate Art being here with us. Go check out, go look up his stuff. Hopefully we'll have some more works from him come out in the future.
Absolutely, yes.
And we'll see. We're probably going to have some more dark fantasy and horror discussions in the future as well. So,
Looking forward to it.
but till next time, we appreciate you being with us today and go in good spirits.
Over and out.
Thanks for listening to the Creators Guild podcast. Don't forget to get your copy of A Flight from Shadows, available on Amazon. While you're there, please rate it and give it a review. If you like the Creators Guild, please like and subscribe, and make sure to share it with your friends. Until next time, go in good spirits.